quote-unquote W is a little dangerous. Not only will it create the file for you, it will also recreate the file for you every time you open the file in that mode. So if you open the file once and write Hermione, that worked just fine, as we saw. But if you do it again for Harry, if you do it again for Ron, the code is working, but each time it's opening the file and recreating it with brand new contents. So we had one version with Hermione, one version with Harry, and one final version with Ron. But ideally, I think we probably want to be appending, as Vishal says, each of those names to the file, not just clobbering, that is overwriting the file each time. So how can I do this? It's actually a relatively easy fix. Let me go ahead and do this as follows. I'm going to first remove the old version of names.txt. And now I'm going to change my code to do this. I'm going to change the W, quote unquote, to just A, quote unquote, A for append, which means to add to the bottom, to the bottom, to the bottom, again and again. Now let me go ahead and rerun Python of names.py, enter. I'll again start from scratch with Hermione, because I'm creating the file new. Notice that if I now do code of names.txt, enter, we do see that Hermione is back. So after removing the file, it did get recreated, even though I'm using append, which is good. But now let's see what happens when I go back to my terminal, and this time I run Python of names.py again, this time typing in Harry, and let me run it one more time, this time typing in Ron. So hopefully this time, in that second tab, names.txt, I should now see all three of them, but, this doesn't look ideal. What have I clearly done wrong? Something tells me, even though all three names are there, it's not going to be easy to read those back unless you know where each name ends and begins.
The English format is not correct. The English format is not correct. Like it's not correct. It's concatenating them.
It is. Well, it appears to be concatenating, but technically speaking, it's just appending to the file. First Hermione, then Harry, then Ron. It has the effect of combining them back to back, but it's not concatenating per se. It really is just appending. Let's go to another hand here. What really have I done wrong? Or equivalently, how might I fix? It would be nice if there were some kind of gaps between each of the names so we could read them more cleanly.
Hello, we should add a new line before we write new name.
Good. We want to add a new line ourselves. So whereas print by default, recall, always outputs automatically a line ending of \n unless we override it with the named parameter called end, write does not do that. Write takes you literally. And if you say write Hermione, that's it. You're getting the H through the E. If you say write Harry, you get the H through the Y. You don't get any extra new lines automatically. So if you want to have a new line at the end of each of these names, we've got to do that manually. So let me again close names.txt, and let me remove the current file, and let me go back up to my code here, and I can fix this in any number of ways, but I'm just going to go ahead and do this. I'm going to write out an F string that contains name and \n at the end. We could do this in different ways. We could manually print just the new line or some other technique, but I'm going to go ahead and use my F strings, as I'm in the habit of doing, and just print the name and the new line all at once. I'm going to go ahead now and down to my terminal window, run Python of names.py again, enter. We'll type in Hermione. I'm going to run it again, type in Harry. I'm going to type it again, and this time Ron. Now I'm going to run code of names.txt and open that file, and now it looks like the file is a bit cleaner. Indeed, I have each of the name on its own line, as well as a line ending, which ensures that we can separate one from the other. Now, if I were writing code, I bet I could parse, that is, read the previous file by looking at differences between lowercase and uppercase letters, but that's going to get messy quickly. Generally speaking, when storing data long-term in a file, you should probably do it somehow cleanly, like doing one name at a time. Well, let's now go back, and I'll propose that this code is now working correctly, but we can design it a little bit better. It turns out that it's all too easy when writing code to sometimes forget to close files. And sometimes this isn't necessarily a big deal, but sometimes it can create problems. Files could get corrupted or accidentally deleted or the like, depending on what happens in your code. So it turns out that you don't strictly need to call close on the file yourself if you take another approach instead. More Pythonic, when manipulating files, is to do this, to introduce this other keyword called, quite simply, with, that allows you to specify that in this context, I want you to open and automatically close some file. So how do we use with? It simply looks like this. Let me go back to my code here. I've gotten rid of the close line, and I'm now just going to say this instead. Instead of saying file equals open, I'm going to say with open, then the same arguments as before, and somewhat curiously, I'm going to put the variable at the end of the line. Why? That's just the way this is done. You say with, you call the function in question, and then you say as, and specify the name of the variable that should be assigned the return value of open. Then I'm going to go ahead and indent the line underneath so that the line of code that's writing the name is now in the context of this with statement, which just ensures that automatically, if I had more code in this file down below, no longer indented, the file would be automatically closed as soon as line 4 is done executing. So it doesn't change what has just happened, but it does automate the process of at least closing things for us, just to ensure I don't forget and so that something doesn't go wrong. But suppose now that I wanted to read these names from the file. All I've done thus far is write code that writes names to the file, but let's assume now that we have all of these names in the file, and heck, let's go ahead and add one more. Let me go ahead and run this one more time, python of names.py, and let's add in Draco to the mix. So now that we have all 4 of these names here, how might we want to read them back? Well, let me propose that we go into names.py now, or we could create another program altogether, but I'm going to keep reusing the same name just to keep us focused on this. And now I'm going to write code that reads an existing file with Hermione, Harry, Ron, and Draco together. And how do I do this? Well, it's similar in spirit. I'm going to start this time with, open, and then the first argument is going to be the name of the file that I want to open, as before, and I'm going to go open it this time in read mode, quote unquote R, and to read a file just means to load it, not to save it, and I'm going to name the return value file. And now I'm going to do this, and there's a number of ways I can do this, but one way to read all of the lines from the file at once would be this. Let me declare a variable called lines. Let me access that file and call a function or a method that comes with it called readLines. So if you read the documentation on file IO in Python, you'll see that open files come with a special method whose purpose in life is to read all of the lines from the file and return them to me as a list. So what this line 2 is doing is it's reading all of the lines from that file, storing them in a variable called lines. Now suppose I want to iterate over all of those lines and print out each of those names. For line in lines, this is just a standard for loop in Python. Lines is a list. Line is the variable that will be automatically be set to each of those lines. Let me go ahead and print out something like, oh, hello, comma, and then I'll print out the line itself. All right, so let me go to my terminal window, run python of names.py now. I have not deleted names.txt, so it still contains all 4 of those names, and hit enter. And OK, it's not bad, but it's a little ugly here. What's going on? When I ran names.py, it's saying hello to Hermione, to Harry, to Ron, to Draco, but there's these gaps now between the lines. What explains that symptom? If nothing
Okay.
Good answer, man. Whenever you're ready.
Okay. I have to put the password. The password is okay. Let me show this. Got it. Siempre olvido la contraseña. Creo que es esta. Vamos a ver si es esta la contraseña. Bien. Perfecto. Vamos a cambiar acá.
nothing else it's line, hello UG's names, and hit now, and call a function or number of ones where we could create another to Drake bar. Let me go ahead and run this one more time, Python of names.py, and we want to program to write code together, but I'm going to keep reusing the same name just to keep us with. Well, it's similar in spirit. File that I will be to read all of the access, read the documentation on this in life. So what this line 2 is doing is it's reading all of the lines from that file, storing them in a variable called lines. Now suppose I want to iterate from to me documentation on file IO in Python, you'll see that open files come with a special method whose name is going to do this. And there's a number of ways I can do this, but one way to read all of the lines from the file at once would be this. Let me declare a variable called lines. Let me access that file and call a function or a method that comes with it called readLines. So if you read the documentation on file IO in Python, you'll see that open files come with a special method whose purpose in life is to read all of the lines from the file and return them to me as a list. So what this line 2 is doing is it's reading all of the lines from that file, storing them in a variable called lines. Now suppose I want to iterate over all of those lines and print out each of those names. For line in lines, this is just a standard for loop in Python. Lines is a list. Line is the variable that will be automatically be set to each of those lines. Let me go ahead and print out something like, oh, hello, comma, and then I'll print out the line itself. All right, so let me go to my terminal window, run Python of names.py now. I have not deleted names.txt, so it still contains all 4 of those names, and hit enter. And okay, it's not bad, but it's a little ugly here. What's going on? When I ran names.py, it's saying hello to Hermione, to Harry, to Ron, to Draco, but there's these gaps now between the lines. What explains that symptom? If nothing else, it just looks ugly.
It happens because in the text file, we have new line symbols in between those names, and the print always adds another new line at the end. So you use the same symbol twice.
Perfect. And here's a good example of a bug, a mistake in a program, but if you just think about those first principles, like how do each of the lines of code work that I'm using, you should be able to reason exactly as Rafal did there to say that, all right, well, one of those new lines is coming from the file after each name, and then, of course, print all of these weeks later is still giving us for free that extra new line. So there's a couple possible solutions. I could certainly do this, which we've done in the past, and pass in a named argument to print, like end equals quote unquote. And that's fine. I would argue a little better than that might actually be to do this, to strip off of the end of the line the actual new line itself so that print is handling the printing of everything, the person's name as well as the new line, but you're just stripping off what is really just an implementation detail in the file. We chose to use new lines in my text file to separate one name from another, so arguably it should be a little cleaner in terms of design to strip that off and then let print out what is really just now a name. But that's ultimately a design decision. The effect is going to be exactly the same. Well, if I'm going to open this file and read all the lines and then iterate over all of those lines and print them each out, I could actually combine this into one thing, because right now I'm doing twice as much work. I'm reading all of the lines, then I'm iterating over all of the lines just to print out each of them. Well, in Python with files, you can actually do this. I'm going to erase almost all of these lines now, keeping only the with statement at top. And inside of this with statement, I'm going to say this. For line in file, go ahead and print out, quote unquote, hello, comma, and then line.rstrip. So I'm going to take the approach of stripping off the end of the line, but notice how elegant this is, so to speak. I've opened the file in line 1, and if I want to iterate over every line in the file, I don't have to very explicitly read all the lines, then iterate over all of the lines. I can combine this into one thought. In Python, you can simply say for line in file, and that's going to have the effect of giving you a for loop that iterates over every line in the file one at a time, and on each iteration, updating the value of this variable line to be Hermione, then Harry, then Ron, then Draco. So this, again, is one of the appealing aspects of Python, is that it reads rather like English. For line in file, print this. It's a little more compact when written this way. Well, what if, though, I don't want quite this behavior? Because notice now, if I run python of names.py, it's correct. I'm seeing each of the names and each of the hellos, and there's no extra spaces in between. But just to be difficult, I'd really like us to be sorting these hellos. Really, I'd like to see Draco first, then Harry, then Hermione, then Ron, no matter what order they appear in the file. So I could go in, of course, to the file and manually change the file. But if that file is changing over time based on who is typing their name into the program, that's not really a good solution. In code, I should be able to load the file no matter what it looks like and just sort it all at once. Now, here is a reason to not do what I've just done. I can't iterate over each line in the file and print it out, but sort everything in advance, right? Logically, if I'm looking at each line one at a time and printing it out, it's too late to sort. I really need to read all of the lines first without printing them, sort them, then print them. So we have to take a step back in order to add now this new feature. So how can I do this? If no matter who it go in, of course, then I'd really like us to be sorting these hellos. Really, I'd like to see Draco first, then Harry, then Hermione, then Ron, no matter what order they appear in the file. So I could go in, of course, to the file and manually change the file. But if that file is changing over time based on who is typing their name into the program, that's not really a good solution. In code, I should be able to load the file no matter what it looks like and just sort it all at once. Now, here is a reason to not do what I've just done. I can't iterate over each line in the file and print it out, but sort everything in advance, right? Logically, if I'm looking at each line one at a time and printing it out, it's too late to sort. I really need to read all of the lines first without printing them, sort them, then print them. So we have to take a step back in order to add now this new feature. So how can I do this? Well, let me combine some ideas from before. Let me go ahead and start fresh with this. Let me give myself a list called names and assign it an empty list, just so I have a variable in which to accumulate all of these lines. And now let me open the file with open quote-unquote names.txt, and it turns out, I can tighten this up a little bit, it turns out if you're opening a file to read it, you don't need to specify quote-unquote R. That is the implicit default. So you can tighten things up by just saying open names.txt, and you'll be able to read the file, but not write it. I'm going to give myself a variable called file, as before. I am going to iterate over the file in the same way for line in file, but instead of printing each line, I'm going to do this. I'm going to take my names list and append to it, and this is appending to a list in memory, not appending to the file itself. I'm going to go ahead and append the current line, but I'm going to strip off the new line at the end so that all I'm adding to this list is each of the students' names. Now I can use that familiar technique from before. Let me go outside of this with statement, because now I've read the entire file, presumably, so by the time I'm done with lines 4 and 5, again and again and again for each line in the file, I'm done with the file. It can close. I now have all of the students' names in this list variable. Let me do this. For name in, not just names, but the sorted names, using our Python function sorted, which does just that, and do print, quote unquote, with an F string, hello, comma, and now I'll plug in bracket name. So now what have I done? I'm creating a list at the beginning, just so I have a place to gather my data. I then, on lines 3 through 5, iterate over the file from top to bottom, reading in each line one at a time, stripping off the new line, and adding just the student's name to this list. And the reason I'm doing that is so that on line 7, I can sort all of those names, now that they're all in memory, and print them in order. I need to load them all into memory before I can sort them. Otherwise, I'd be printing them out prematurely, and Draco would end up last instead of first. So let me go ahead in my terminal window and run Python of names.py now and hit enter. And there we go. The same list of 4 hellos, but now they're sorted. And this is a very common technique when dealing with files and information more generally. If you want to change that data in some way, like sorting it, creating some kind of variable at the top of your program like a list, adding or appending information to it just to collect it in one place, and then do something interesting with that collection, that list, is exactly what I've done here. Now, I should note that if we just want to sort the file, we can actually do this even more simply in Python, particularly by not bothering with this names list, nor the second for loop. And let me go ahead and instead just do more simply this. Let me go ahead and tell Python that we want the file itself to be sorted using that same sorted function, but this time on the file itself. And then inside of that for loop, let's just go ahead and print right away our hello comma, followed by the line itself, but still stripping off of the end of it any white space therein. If we go ahead and run this same program now with python of names.py and hit enter, we get the same result, but of course it's a lot more compact. But for the sake of discussion, let's assume that we do actually want to potentially make some changes to the data as we iterate over it. So let me undo those changes, leave one a lot more compact. But for the sake of discussion, let's assume that we do actually want to potentially make some changes to the data as we iterate over it. So let me undo those changes, leave things as is, whereby now we'll continue to accumulate all of the names first into a list, maybe do something to them, maybe forcing them to uppercase or lowercase or the like, and then sort and print out each item. Let me pause and see if there's any questions now on file I/O, reading or writing, or now accumulating all of these values in some list.
Hi, is there a way to sort the files, but instead if you want it from alphabetically from A to Z, is there a way to reverse it from Z to A? Is there like a little extension that you can add to the end to do that, or would you have to create a new function?
If you wanted to reverse the contents of the file?
Yeah, so if you, instead of sorting them from A to Z in ascending order, if you wanted them in descending order, is there an extension for that?
There is indeed, and as always, the documentation is your friend. So if the goal is to sort them, not in alphabetical order, which is the default, but maybe reverse alphabetical order, you can take a look, for instance, at the formal Python documentation there, and what you'll see is this summary. You'll see that the sorted function takes a first argument, generally known as an iterable. And something that's iterable means that you can iterate over it. That is, you can loop over it, one thing at a time. What the rest of this line here means is that you can specify a key, like how you want to sort it, but more on that later. But this last named parameter here is reverse. And by default, per the documentation, it's false. It will not be reversed by default, but if we change that to true, I bet we can do that. So let me go back to VS Code here and do just that. Let me go ahead and pass in a second argument to sorted in addition to this iterable, which is my names list. Iterable again in the sense that it can be looped over. And let me pass in reverse equals true, thereby overriding the default of false. Let me now run Python of names.py, and now Ron's at the top and Draco's at the bottom. So there too, whenever you have a question like that moving forward, consider what does the documentation say and see if there's a germ of an idea there, because odds are if you have some problem, odds are some programmer before you has had the same question. Other thoughts?
Can we limit numbers of names? And the second question, can we find specific name in list?
Really good question. Can we limit the number of the names in the file, and can we find a specific one? We absolutely could. If we were to write code, we could, for instance, open the file first, count how many lines are already there, and then if there's too many already, we could just exit with sys.exit or some other message to indicate to the user that, sorry, the class is full. As for finding someone specifically, absolutely. You could imagine opening the file, iterating over it with a for loop again and again, and then adding a conditional. Like if the current line equals Harry, then we found the chosen run, and you can print something like that. So you can absolutely combine these ideas with previous ideas like conditionals to ask those same questions. How about one other question on file I/O?
So I just thought about this function like read all lines, and it looks like it's like separate all the lines by this special character \n, but it looks like we don't need it character, and we always strip it, and it looks like some bad design of function. Why wouldn't we just strip it inside this function?
A really good question. So we are, in my examples thus far, using rstrip to reverse, strip from the end of the line all of this white space. You might not want to do that. In this case, I am stripping it away because I know that each of those lines isn't some generic line of text. Each line really represents a name that I have put there myself. I'm using the new line just to separate one value from another. In other scenarios, you might very well want to keep that line ending because it's a very long series of text or a paragraph or something like that where you want to keep it distinct from the others, but it's just a convention. We have to use something, presumably, to separate one chunk of text from another. There are other functions in Python that will, in fact, handle the removal of that white space for you. Readlines, though, does literally that, though. It reads all of the lines as is. Well, allow me to turn our attention back to where we left off here, which is just names, to propose that with names.txt, we have an ability, it seems, to store each of these names pretty straightforwardly. But what if we wanted to keep track of other information as well? Suppose that we wanted to store information including a student's name and their house at Hogwarts, be it Gryffindor or Slytherin or something else. Well, where do we go about putting that? You know, Hermione lives in Gryffindor, so we could do something like this in our text file. Harry lives in Gryffindor, so we could do that. Ron lives in Gryffindor, so we could do that. And Draco lives in Slytherin, so we could do that. But I worry here, now that we're mixing apples and oranges, so to speak. Like some lines are names, some lines are houses, so this probably isn't the best design, if only because it's confusing or it's ambiguous. So maybe what we could do is adopt a convention. And indeed, this is in fact what a lot of programmers do. They change this file not to be names.txt, but instead let me create a new file called names.csv. CSV stands for